Mafia boss goes on a blind date with the waitress as a bet, and is shocked when it was a chilly evening in New York City when Mafia boss Dominic Valentino received an unusual challenge from his closest friends. Over cocktails at an exclusive lounge, one of them had made a bold bet. He dared Dominic to go on a blind date with a waitress, just an ordinary waitress. The catch? It was all for fun, a way to prove that even someone like him, a man whose empire was built on ruthlessness and power, could survive a real-world date with someone from a completely different world. Dominic, always the one to accept a challenge, couldn't resist the temptation to show that he could master any situation, no matter how unexpected. He grinned, agreeing to the bet, his cold eyes flashing with mischief. Little did he know, this decision would lead him down a path he never anticipated. That evening, the restaurant where he was to meet the waitress was bustling, with waiters scurrying between tables, carrying platters of food. Dominic stood at the entrance, adjusting his dark suit, his polished shoes tapping against the marble floor. His presence alone commanded attention. He had built his empire from the ground up, his name feared and respected across the city. But tonight, he was about to step into a situation he had no control over. As the hostess guided him to the table, Dominic's eyes scanned the room. Then he saw her. Sophia, the waitress. Her name was simple, but everything about her presence felt so much more. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back into a neat bun, and her uniform was crisp, fitted perfectly to her slender frame. She didn't look like the women he was used to, those who flaunted their wealth and beauty, but there was something captivating about her. She had a quiet elegance, a natural poise that drew Dominic's attention immediately. As he sat down, Sophia gave him a polite, practiced smile. Her eyes, however, told a different story. There was a hesitation in them, an awareness that this was not an ordinary evening. Dominic, on the other hand, was trying his best to hide the smirk that tugged at the corner of his lips. He was a mafia boss, but tonight, he was playing a game he didn't understand yet. He couldn't help but be intrigued by Sophia. As they exchanged small talk, Dominic noticed that she was sharp, intelligent, and didn't flinch under his gaze, something that caught him off guard. This wasn't like the usual interactions he had with people. This felt different. As the evening wore on, Dominic found himself more and more engrossed in the conversation. He was used to manipulating situations to his advantage, but tonight, it was as if the tables were turning. Sophia was not intimidated by him. Instead, she engaged him in ways he had never experienced. They laughed, discussed everything from their favorite books to their pasts, and Dominic felt an unfamiliar connection growing between them. But just as things started to feel comfortable, something changed. Sophia's expression shifted subtly, and Dominic couldn't help but notice it. There was something more to this woman than met the eye. What started as a simple bet had now turned into something far more complicated. Dominic was about to learn that even in a world as cold and calculated as his, there were surprises that no amount of money or power could prepare him for. After their initial conversation, Dominic couldn't stop thinking about Sophia. He had met countless women, many of them more beautiful and sophisticated than she appeared to be. But there was something about her, something unexpected, that had stayed with him. He had underestimated her, expected her to be like all the others, a simple, easily manipulated person in his world of wealth and power. But she wasn't. As the evening progressed, he found himself drawn to her in a way he hadn't felt in years. There was no pretense about her. She didn't care who he was or what he had. She treated him just like any other man sitting at her table. That, in itself, was refreshing. It wasn't long before Dominic realized that he was no longer just playing the game. He was caught up in it. He had no intention of getting emotionally involved, not with someone from her background. After all, what could someone like her offer to a man like him? Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Sophia than met the eye. As the night wore on, he watched her closely. Her movements were graceful, her smile genuine. But there was a sadness in her eyes, a depth that intrigued him. He wanted to know more. As she brought him the check, he hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice low, almost vulnerable. "For what?" she asked, genuinely curious. "For making this night different," he replied. Sophia raised an eyebrow, surprised by his response. "I'm just doing my job," she said, shrugging as if it were nothing. But Dominic knew it wasn't nothing. He could feel the tension between them, the unspoken understanding that had grown over the course of the evening. There was something real here, something neither of them could ignore. As she turned to leave, Dominic caught her wrist, his grip firm but not forceful. She looked back at him, eyes wide. "You don't have to leave yet," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to know more about you." Sophia hesitated for a moment, then nodded, allowing him to pull her back into the booth. They sat in silence for a few moments, the noise of the restaurant fading into the background. Sophia looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But there was none. Dominic was not the man he had been earlier that evening. He had allowed himself to be vulnerable, something he hadn't done in a long time. "I never asked you why you agreed to this," Sophia said quietly, breaking the silence. Dominic looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Why not?" he replied. "You had a bet to win, and I just happened to be the person you chose." "That's not it," Sophia said, shaking her head. "I mean, I don't get it. Why me?" Dominic took a deep breath, unsure of how to answer. He had always been the one in control, the one making the decisions. But with her, it felt different. She wasn't intimidated by him. She didn't care about his wealth, his status, or his power. She saw him as a person, not just the mafia boss everyone feared. "You're not like anyone else," he said finally, his voice steady but carrying an honesty that surprised them both. Sophia looked at him, her eyes softening. "I'm not surprised to be one," she said softly, "but I'm glad you see me as more than that." Dominic smiled, a small, genuine smile that he hadn't used in a long time. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was connecting with someone on a real level. It wasn't just the game anymore. It was something deeper, something he wasn't ready to face but couldn't deny. As they sat there, their conversation drifted to more personal matters. Sophia opened up about her life, her family, her struggles, and the dreams she still held on to. Dominic listened intently, captivated not just by her story, but by the way she told it, without hesitation, without fear. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was simply being herself. And for the first time in a long time, Dominic felt something stir within him that wasn't related to business, power, or control. He felt human. This blind date, this bet that he had accepted on a whim, had turned into something far more complicated than he could have imagined. And as the night came to a close, he found himself not wanting it to end. He wanted more time with Sophia. He wanted to explore whatever this connection was between them. But as he stood up to leave, he knew he couldn't just walk away from her like he had with everyone else in his life. Something had changed, and he wasn't sure where it would lead, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't the same man who had walked into this restaurant an hour ago. As Dominic sat there, his mind racing with thoughts about Sophia, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary night. What was supposed to be a simple bet, a chance to prove his power and control, had quickly turned into something much more complicated. She was different. He couldn't deny it. But what did that mean for him? For his life? For his empire? As he stared into his drink, the ice clinking against the glass, he realized that Sophia had slipped under his skin in a way no one else ever had. For years, he had kept his emotions tightly in check, refusing to let anyone close enough to hurt him. But tonight, with her, it was as if those walls were slowly crumbling. As if for the first time, he was allowing himself to feel something. But there was no room for feelings in his world. There couldn't be, not with everything he had built. And yet, as he remembered her laughter, the way her eyes had softened when she spoke of her family, something deep inside him stirred. She had made him feel seen, not as a mafia boss or a man of power, but as a person with real emotions. Dominic stood up, running a hand through his hair as he tried to push those thoughts aside. No, he couldn't let this happen. He couldn't let her get to him. He had a reputation to uphold, an empire to protect. But as he reached for his coat, he found himself hesitating. He had told her he wanted to know more about her. He had invited her into his world, even if just for tonight. And now he wanted more. He wanted to know if she could feel the same connection that had taken root in him. Without thinking, he grabbed his phone from his pocket and dialed her number. It rang twice before she answered, her voice soft and a little surprised. "Hello, Sophia," Dominic said, his voice steady but carrying an unfamiliar edge. "I know this was supposed to be just a bet, but I want to see you again." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion. I mean, Dominic said, leaning against the bar, I want to take you out. Not as a bet. Not as part of some game. Just you and me. He could hear the hesitation in her voice. She wasn't the type to rush into things, especially with someone like him. I don't know if that's a good idea, she replied cautiously. I don't want to complicate things. Dominic smiled, his gaze softening. I think it's already complicated, he said quietly. But I think it's worth exploring. There was another long pause before Sophia spoke again. Okay, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll go out with you. But this time, no games. Just us. Dominic's heart skipped a beat as he heard the words. He knew he had just crossed a line, but somehow, it felt right. He had never been one to chase after something real, but in this moment, he realized he didn't want to let her go. As they made plans for the next evening, Dominic felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. It was something he wasn't used to feeling, vulnerable. But this was no longer about a bet or a game. This was about something deeper. As he hung up the phone, Dominic took a deep breath, staring at the city lights through the window. His world was full of power, money, and fear. But for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about Sophia. And he didn't know where this would lead, but he knew he wanted to find out. The next day, Sophia stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her dress for their date. She had agreed to meet him, but she couldn't quite shake the feeling that she was stepping into something she wasn't ready for. After all, Dominic Valentino was no ordinary man. He was a mafia boss, the kind of man who controlled entire empires with a single word. And yet, there she was, preparing to meet him for the second time. What did he see in her? Why would he want someone like her? As she finished getting ready, Sophia took a deep breath and glanced at herself in the mirror. She wasn't the kind of woman who got swept up in the world of power and privilege, but for some reason, Dominic had made her feel different. He had shown her a side of himself that few people ever saw, vulnerable, real. And despite all the warnings she had given herself, she couldn't help but feel drawn to him. But still, the question lingered. Was she just another pawn in his game? Or could this be something more? As she stepped out the door and into the night, she knew she was about to find out. The night of their second date arrived, and Dominic found himself oddly nervous. He wasn't used to feeling this way, especially not for someone who wasn't a part of his world. Sophia had agreed to meet him again, no strings attached, but in the back of his mind, Dominic wondered if she was just as unsure as he was. The restaurant they chose was an upscale Italian place, the kind that had white tablecloths, dim lighting, and an air of sophistication. Dominic arrived early, his sharp suit looking impeccable as always. He watched as people came and went, their laughter and chatter echoing throughout the room. But none of them caught his attention like Sophia did when she walked in. She looked different tonight, still the same woman, but there was a newfound confidence in her step. Her dress was simple but elegant, the color of deep emerald green, and it hugged her figure perfectly. Her dark hair cascaded in soft waves over her shoulders, and as she looked around for him, their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved, both of them standing still as the world seemed to slow down around them. Then, Sophia smiled softly and walked toward him, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Dominic stood up, his heart unexpectedly racing in his chest. When she reached the table, he pulled out her chair, something he never did for anyone. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice sincere. Sophia blushed slightly but smiled. "Thank you. You look different. Different in a good way, I hope," he teased, his lips curling into a small smile. She sat down, and for the first time since their first meeting, the air between them felt charged, yet comfortable. They exchanged pleasantries as the waiter took their drink orders, and Dominic noticed how easy it was to talk to her. There was no pretense, no expectations, just two people sitting across from each other, getting to know one another. The conversation flowed effortlessly, from lighthearted topics like favorite movies and childhood memories to deeper discussions about life, dreams, and what truly mattered. Dominic was taken aback by Sophia's honesty. She didn't shy away from talking about her past, her struggles, or the dreams she still clung to, even though they seemed impossible. It was a refreshing change from the people he was used to, those who only talked about what they could gain from him. But with Sophia, it was different. She wasn't looking for anything from him. She simply wanted to connect. As the night went on, Dominic found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years. He spoke about his childhood, the pressure of growing up in a family like his, and the sacrifices he had to make to get to where he was now. It felt strange, almost liberating, to talk about his past so openly. Sophia listened intently, her eyes soft with understanding. "I didn't expect to meet someone like you," she said, her voice quiet, almost as if she was still processing everything they had talked about. "Someone like me?" Dominic raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Yeah, I mean, you're so different from everyone else I've met. You're real. You're not trying to impress me or make me like you. And I appreciate that more than you know." Dominic's chest tightened at her words. He wasn't used to hearing such genuine praise. Most people were afraid of him, or they wanted something from him. But Sophia was different. She didn't care about his wealth or power. She cared about who he was beneath all of that. The dinner ended much too quickly for Dominic's liking. They both agreed that it was the best date they had been on in a long time, and the chemistry between them was undeniable. As they stepped out of the restaurant, Dominic walked her to her car, a place where the real world seemed to meet the fantasy they had been living in for the past few hours. "I had a great time tonight," Sophia said, turning to face him as she reached her car door. Dominic stood there for a moment, the tension between them thick. "So did I," he replied, his voice low. He wasn't sure what came next, or if he should push for more. But as he looked at her, something inside him urged him to take the chance. "Can I see you again?" he asked, the words feeling almost foreign coming from him. Sophia smiled, her eyes sparkling. "I'd like that," she said softly. "But this time, no games. Just us." Dominic nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. No games. He watched as she got into her car and drove off, his heart still racing. As he stood there, alone in the parking lot, he couldn't help but think about how much had changed in such a short amount of time. From the beginning of their blind date to now, everything had shifted. He had gone from seeing this as a simple bet to realizing that what he felt for Sophia was real. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what to do with it. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let her go. Dominic's heart raced as he watched Sophia walk away, the engine of her car purring into the night. The night had been perfect, everything he hadn't expected and everything he didn't know he needed. But now, standing alone in the parking lot, the realization of what had just happened began to hit him. This wasn't just about a bet anymore. It wasn't a game. He had let himself feel something for the first time in years, and it terrified him. He knew that in his world, vulnerability was a weakness. Power was everything. And Dominic Valentino had spent his entire life building a fortress around himself, keeping everyone at arm's length. But with Sophia, it was different. She made him want to let down his guard, to be honest, even though he didn't know how. The next few days passed in a blur for Dominic. He found himself thinking about Sophia at the most unexpected moments. Whether it was during a meeting with his men or when he was alone in his office, her smile, her laugh, her warmth kept creeping into his thoughts. He tried to push it away, tried to focus on his work, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't. For the first time in his life, he was questioning everything. The power, the wealth, the control, it all felt empty without her. She was a reminder of a world he had long buried, a world where things like love, trust, and connection existed. But those things had no place in his life. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. Sophia, on the other hand, had her own doubts. She couldn't deny the connection she felt with Dominic, but she was also cautious. She knew who he was. She knew what he represented. But there was something about him, something raw, something real, that made her want to believe that there could be more. She had always been wary of men like him, the powerful, ruthless type who had everything but still wanted more. But Dominic wasn't like the others. He wasn't cold and distant. When they were together, he was different. He was real. After their second date, Sophia had gone home with mixed emotions. Part of her was scared of what this could mean for her and for him. But another part of her, the part that longed for something genuine, wanted to take a chance. She had never met anyone like him. And yet, she couldn't help but wonder if this was just another game to him. What if she was just a distraction, a bet he wanted to win? But even with those doubts lingering in her mind, she couldn't help but reach for her phone. She sent him a simple text. "I had a great time tonight. I'm glad we did this." It wasn't much, but it was a start. Within seconds, he responded, "So did I. Would you like to meet again? No games this time." The simplicity of his words surprised her. She wasn't used to men like him being so direct, so honest. It made her smile. She had been afraid that he would pull away, that he would go back to his world of power and games. But here he was, asking her to meet again. It was a sign. Or at least, that's what she told herself. They made plans to meet the following weekend. The days leading up to it were filled with anticipation for both of them. Dominic found himself in uncharted territory, unsure of what to expect. He knew he was taking a risk, but for the first time, the risk felt worth it. He was ready to see where this would go. When the weekend finally arrived, Dominic was at the restaurant early, waiting for Sophia. His heart was beating faster than he cared to admit. He knew he was out of his element, but for some reason, that didn't matter. All that mattered was that he wanted to see her. When she walked in, looking even more beautiful than the first time, his breath caught in his throat. She smiled at him, her eyes lighting up as she approached the table. "I was starting to think you weren't going to show up," she teased. Dominic stood up, a small smile crossing his lips. "I wouldn't miss it," he said. They both sat down, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. This time, there were no games. There were no bets. It was just them. As they began talking, Dominic felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. They talked about everything: life, their dreams, their fears, and what they wanted out of this strange connection between them. For the first time, Dominic felt like he was being understood, not because of his wealth, not because of his title, but because of who he truly was. As the night went on, the conversation grew deeper, and Dominic couldn't help but feel a growing sense of hope. Maybe he didn't need to be alone. Maybe there was room in his life for someone like Sophia. And as they said goodnight, Dominic found himself asking the one question he never thought he would. "Would you want to be a part of my life, Sophia?" She smiled, her eyes soft. "I think I already am." After that night, everything changed. Dominic's world, which had once been firmly controlled by money, power, and fear, began to feel different. Sophia had come into his life like a whirlwind, shaking up the structure he had carefully built over the years. It wasn't just that she was beautiful or kind, or that she made him feel things he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. No, it was more than that. She had made him question everything. Was it possible for someone like him, someone who ruled with an iron fist, to have a place for someone like her? Was it possible for him to change, to let go of the walls he had so carefully built around himself? These were the questions that consumed Dominic as he went through his days. He found himself seeking her out at random moments, unable to focus on the cold realities of his empire as he thought about the warmth of her smile, the way she made him laugh, and the way she made him feel like he wasn't just another mafia boss, but a man. Over the next few weeks, they met more often. The meetings weren't flashy or grand. They were simple, down-to-earth dinners or walks in the park. Dominic was careful to keep his other world at a distance, even as he became more and more entwined with Sophia's. But there was always a part of him that held back, afraid of fully opening up to her, afraid of what it would mean if he let someone like her into his life for real. Then came the day when everything shifted. Dominic was at a meeting with his closest associates when he received a call from Sophia. Her voice on the other end was strained, the kind of sound that immediately set off alarms in his mind. "Dominic, something happened. I need to talk to you." The way she said his name sent a chill down his spine. Without thinking, he stood up and excused himself, heading out the door, his mind racing. Sophia was never like this. She was always calm, always composed. Something was wrong. When he arrived at her apartment, he found her sitting on the couch, her hands clenched in her lap. Her usual warm, open expression was gone, replaced by a look of deep concern. "Sophia?" Dominic's voice was soft, cautious. "What's going on?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with worry. "It's my brother. He's in trouble. I just found out he's been gambling with some dangerous people. They're threatening him, Dominic. They're demanding money, and if he can't pay, they said they'll hurt him." The words hit Dominic like a punch to the gut. He knew all too well what it meant to owe people like that. He had built his empire by making sure no one ever owed him anything they couldn't pay back. "Where is he?" Dominic's voice was steady, the protective instinct kicking in immediately. Sophia hesitated for a moment before answering. "I don't know. He disappeared after I tried to talk to him. I've been trying to reach him, but no luck." Dominic's jaw tightened. He couldn't stand seeing her like this, her usual confidence replaced by fear. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry. We'll find him. I'll make sure he's safe." Sophia's eyes met his, searching for something. Trust, maybe. She took a deep breath and nodded. I don't know what I would do without you. The words hit Dominic harder than he expected. For the first time, he realized just how deeply he cared for her, how far he was willing to go for her. He wasn't just helping her because it was the right thing to do. He was helping her because he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. As he turned to leave, to track down the men who were threatening Sophia's brother, he couldn't help but feel the weight of what he was about to do. He had crossed a line. He wasn't just a mafia boss anymore. He was someone who cared about someone else. That thought terrified him more than any threat he had ever faced. But it was too late to turn back now. As they made their way to the car, Sophia clung to him, her hand gripping his sleeve. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Dominic nodded, but inside, he was torn. He had lived his whole life with one rule: never get too close to anyone. But Sophia was different. She had changed him in ways he didn't even understand. And now, as they drove into the night, he knew he couldn't go back to the way things were. He had to protect her, no matter what it took. And as he looked at her, sitting next to him, her face full of worry but trusting him completely, he made a promise to himself. No matter the cost, he would keep her safe. Dominic and Sophia sat in his car, the weight of the situation pressing down on both of them. They had driven through the city streets in tense silence, their destination unknown, but their purpose clear. Sophia's brother, Lucas, had fallen into the hands of dangerous people, and Dominic's empire was the only tool he had to protect him. The streets outside blurred as the car moved faster, the headlights slicing through the night. The sound of the engine was the only thing breaking the silence. As Sophia stared out of the window, her fingers clenched into tight fists. Dominic's mind raced, calculating every possible outcome, weighing every risk. He had built his world through power, fear, and control, but this was different. He was not used to being vulnerable. He was not used to feeling like this, protective, anxious, and uncertain. But for Sophia, he would do anything. She had become more than just a woman he had met through a bet. She had become someone he cared about, someone he couldn't afford to lose. Where are they keeping him? Dominic asked, his voice low, focused. Sophia took a deep breath and wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. I don't know. He hasn't been answering my calls. I tried to reach out to some people I know, but they're all too scared to help. They told me not to get involved. We'll find him, Dominic said, his voice firm. I'll make sure he's safe. The car made a sharp turn down an alleyway, and they came to a stop in front of a nondescript building. Dominic's instincts told him this was the place. It was dark, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp nearby. The sound of muffled voices and the faint hum of activity drifted from within. Stay here, Dominic instructed, turning to Sophia. I'll take care of this. Sophia reached out and grabbed his arm, her grip strong. No, Dominic, she said, her voice desperate. I'm coming with you. He looked at her, his eyes softening for a brief moment before the cold determination took over again. You're not getting involved in this. It's too dangerous. I'm not letting you do this alone, she insisted, her eyes pleading with him. Dominic hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Fine, but stay behind me, and do exactly as I say. They both stepped out of the car and walked toward the building, the night air sharp and cold against their skin. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest as they approached the door. The closer they got, the more she could feel the danger in the air. This wasn't just a fight for her brother's life. This was a battle that would push Dominic and her to the limits of everything they had built, and everything they feared. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with heavy shadows filling the corners. A few men were gathered around, their voices low and threatening. As they stepped further into the room, the men turned, their eyes immediately narrowing at the sight of Dominic. Valentino, one of them sneered, his voice thick with disdain. What are you doing here? I'm here for him, Dominic said coldly, his eyes scanning the room. Where's Lucas? The man smirked, leaning against the wall. What's it to you? He owes us money, and when someone owes, we collect. Dominic's jaw tightened as he stepped forward, his presence commanding. You're going to release him, he said, his voice unwavering. And you're going to walk away. Now, the men laughed, but the laughter died quickly when Dominic took another step closer, his expression never wavering. He was not the man they expected. He was not the mafia boss who played games. He was the man who made things happen. You don't get to make demands here, the man growled. But Dominic was already 2 steps ahead. With a single nod, the door to the back room opened, and a third man stepped forward, dragging a disheveled Lucas behind him. Sophia gasped as she saw her brother, his face bruised and eyes wide with fear. She rushed toward him, but Dominic held her back. "Let me handle this," he murmured. Sophia's heart was in her throat, but she nodded, trusting him. Dominic turned to the men, his eyes cold with fury. "This is your last chance," he said, his voice like ice. "Let him go, or there will be consequences you won't walk away from." The tension in the room thickened as the men exchanged wary glances. They knew who Dominic was. They knew the consequences of crossing him. Slowly, they backed away, and Lucas was freed. As Sophia rushed to her brother's side, Dominic kept his gaze fixed on the men, making sure they understood the gravity of the situation. "Get out," Dominic said, his voice deadly calm. The men didn't hesitate. They left without another word, disappearing into the night. Sophia turned to Dominic, her eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Dominic didn't respond at first. He was still processing what had just happened, still reeling from the fact that he had just exposed himself, his vulnerability, his care for Sophia, in a way he hadn't done with anyone before. He had crossed a line, but in doing so, he had shown Sophia just how much he was willing to risk for her. As they left the building, Dominic put a protective arm around Sophia and Lucas, ensuring they were safe. For the first time in a long time, he realized that this, more than anything, was what mattered to him. Not the empire, not the money, but the people he cared about. And for the first time in his life, Dominic felt like he was truly alive. The days that followed the confrontation with Sophia's brother were filled with a strange sense of calm. Dominic had done what he always did. He had protected what mattered. But for the first time, he realized that what mattered to him wasn't his empire, his wealth, or his control over everything. It was Sophia. As he sat in his office, staring out at the city that he had conquered, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside him. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that building days ago. The image of Sophia, standing next to him with a look of pure gratitude in her eyes, haunted him. She had seen him at his most vulnerable, and she had accepted him without question. That kind of acceptance was something Dominic hadn't known he needed. He hadn't realized how much he had longed for someone to look at him like that. She made him feel human. It was an uncomfortable feeling, one that he wasn't sure how to navigate. But as the hours ticked by, he knew that he couldn't ignore it anymore. He had to see her again. He had to talk to her, to figure out what this was, to see if she felt the same way. But when the phone call came, it wasn't Sophia's voice that answered. It was one of his men, his tone serious. "Boss, we have a problem." Dominic's heart immediately dropped. He knew the business, and he knew that when someone said they had a problem, it wasn't something small. "What happened?" he asked, his voice steady despite the rising tension inside him. "It's Grimaldi's crew," the man said, his voice clipped. "They've moved in on one of our properties. They're trying to take control of our territory." Dominic clenched his jaw. Grimaldi was a rival, one of the few men who had managed to hold his ground against Dominic's empire. If Grimaldi was making a move, it meant something big was coming. "I'll handle it," Dominic said, standing up and grabbing his jacket. "I need everything in place in the next hour. I want to know exactly where they are." As he hung up the phone, Dominic felt the familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through him. This was the life he had chosen, the life of constant power struggles, where his decisions meant the difference between life and death. But as he walked toward the door, something tugged at him, pulling him back. Sophia. He couldn't afford to lose her. And yet, this world, the world he was about to step back into, was no place for someone like her. He couldn't bring her into this. It was too dangerous. Still, the thought of walking away from her made his chest tighten. He couldn't shake the feeling that if he let this moment slip away, it might be the one thing he would regret forever. Dominic's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone ringing again. He picked it up, expecting another call about the situation with Grimaldi, but this time, it was Sophia. "Dominic, we need to talk." Her voice was calm, but there was an underlying urgency that made his heart race. "Where are you?" he asked quickly. "I'm at the apartment," she said. "I've been trying to reach you, but you've been busy, and I need to tell you something." Dominic's pulse quickened. He didn't know what was going on, but he knew that whatever it was, It was important. I'm on my way, he said, cutting the call. He had no idea what she needed to tell him, but he knew that it couldn't wait. When he arrived at her apartment, the door was slightly ajar. He knocked, but there was no answer. His hand hovered over the door. Then he pushed it open, stepping inside. The apartment was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. Sophia, he called, his voice cautious. He stepped further into the apartment, scanning the room. That's when he saw her. She was standing near the window, her back to him. She didn't turn around when he entered. Sophia, he asked again, his voice softer now, more concerned. She finally turned, her face pale, her eyes filled with something Dominic couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps. Dominic, there's something I have to tell you. She walked toward him, taking his hand in hers. I'm scared. I don't know if I can keep doing this. The words hit Dominic like a punch to the stomach. His first instinct was to pull her into his arms, to reassure her that everything would be okay. But he could see the fear in her eyes. The same fear that had been there when she told him about her brother. You're not alone, he said gently. We'll face this together, whatever it is. But Sophia shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. It's not just the danger. It's everything. You're a part of a world that I don't belong in, and I don't know if I can live with that. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Dominic's mind raced. He had always known this moment might come. The moment when their worlds collided, when his empire and her innocence couldn't exist side by side anymore. He had built his empire on blood and fear. But Sophia was something pure, something he wasn't sure he could protect if he kept her close. I don't want to lose you, Dominic said, his voice hoarse. I can't promise you that my world is safe, but I promise you this. I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe. And if you want out of this, I'll let you go. I won't hold you. Here, Sophia. She looked at him for a long moment, tears welling in her eyes. I don't want to leave, she whispered. But I'm scared of what comes next. Dominic reached out, pulling her into his arms. I know, he murmured. But whatever happens, I'm not letting you go. The following days were a blur of tension, uncertainty, and fear. Dominic's world had become a battleground, and every decision felt heavier than the last. But it was the quiet moments with Sophia that kept him grounded. She had been by his side through everything, her presence a reminder of what truly mattered. Still, the weight of his empire loomed over them. The threats, the constant power struggles. Dominic knew that if he didn't act soon, his world would start to collapse. He had already taken steps to deal with Grimaldi's crew, but it wasn't enough. The shadows of his enemies were closing in, and now, more than ever, he realized how much he had to lose. As he sat in his office late one night, staring at the city skyline, his thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Come in, Dominic said, not bothering to look up. The door opened, and Sophia stepped inside, her face pale, her eyes filled with concern. She had been trying to keep a distance from him these past few days, giving him space to handle his business. But now, she looked as if she had something important to say. Dominic, she said softly, her voice shaking. I can't keep pretending like everything's fine. I see it in your eyes. You're fighting a battle that's tearing you apart, and I'm not sure I can be a part of it anymore. The words hit him like a cold wave, and for a moment, he was speechless. Sophia had always been the calm in his storm, the one thing he could hold on to when everything else was slipping away. But now, she was pulling away, and he couldn't let that happen. Sophia, please don't, he began, but she cut him off, her voice trembling with emotion. I love you, Dominic, but I don't know if I can live in this world anymore. The danger, the lies, it's too much. I don't want to lose myself in this. Her words stung, but Dominic couldn't ignore the truth in them. He had dragged her into a world of chaos, a world where survival was a daily fight. And no matter how much he wanted to protect her, he couldn't protect her from everything. I never wanted this for you, Dominic said quietly, standing up and walking toward her. He reached out, taking her hand in his thumb brushing over her skin. I thought I could control everything. But the one thing I can't control is how much I need you. Sophia looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for something. An answer, perhaps, or a sign that things could be different. You've changed me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I don't know if I can live in a world where I'm constantly afraid for you. I don't want to be the reason you're distracted, the reason you're vulnerable. Dominic's heart broke at the thought of losing her, but he couldn't deny the truth in her words. He had built his empire on fear and power, and he had never allowed himself to truly care about anyone until now. Sophia had brought light into his dark world, but it had also exposed the cracks in his armor. "You're not the reason I'm vulnerable, Sophia," he said softly. "You make me stronger. But you're right. This world is dangerous, and I won't drag you any further into it." Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she shook her head. "I don't want to leave you, Dominic. But I need to know that you're willing to fight for something else, for something more than just this." Her words hung in the air between them, a question he wasn't sure he could answer. The life he had built was all he knew. It was all he had ever wanted. But now, standing here with Sophia, he realized that there was more to life than just power. There was love, and there was the possibility of a future beyond the violence and betrayal. "I don't know if I can change, Sophia," Dominic said, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I can walk away from everything I've built. But I know that I can't lose you. Not now, not ever." The silence that followed felt heavy, like a decision was hanging in the balance. Sophia stood there, her heart torn between the love she felt for him and the fear of what their future might hold. She had never imagined a life like this, a life where the man she loved was at the center of so much darkness. But she had also never imagined a world where she couldn't be with him. "I don't want to lose you, either," she whispered. "But I can't keep living in fear, wondering if the next phone call will be the one that changes everything." Dominic closed the distance between them, cupping her face gently in his hands. "I will fight for you, Sophia," he said, his voice steady, determined. "I'll fight for us. But I need you to believe in me, in us." Sophia looked into his eyes, searching for the truth in his words. For the first time in their relationship, she saw the man behind the Mafia boss, the man who was willing to change, willing to fight for something more than just his empire. "I believe in you," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "And I believe in us." As Dominic pulled her into his arms, he knew that nothing in his world would ever be the same. The fight was far from over, but now, he had something worth fighting for, and he was willing to do whatever it took to protect it. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Dominic's empire had always been his life, but for the first time, he was torn between it and something far more personal, his future with Sophia. As the weight of the world continued to press down on him, he found himself spending more and more time with her, even though his work demanded more of his attention than ever. The power struggles that had once been so familiar now felt distant, irrelevant compared to the warmth and care Sophia brought into his life. But that didn't mean his enemies were giving him a break. Grimaldi's crew was still trying to make moves, and it was clear they weren't backing down. Dominic knew that a final confrontation was inevitable. It was only a matter of time before he had to face them head-on. But there was something new in his mind now, Sophia. She had become the one constant in his life, and as much as he wanted to protect her from the dangers of his world, he couldn't keep her in the dark any longer. They needed to have the conversation that neither of them had wanted to have. That afternoon, Dominic found Sophia sitting by the window in his penthouse, staring out at the city below. He could tell she was deep in thought, her expression distant. He hesitated for a moment before walking over to her. "Sophia," he asked, his voice low. She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the sadness and concern that had been weighing on her. "Dominic," she said softly, "we can't keep pretending that everything is fine. I can see it in your eyes. You're planning something, and I can't keep ignoring it." Dominic took a deep breath, his hands clenched at his sides. "I've tried to protect you from this world," he said quietly, his voice full of frustration. "But it's not just a part of who I am. It's who I've always been. And right now, there's no way out." "I don't want to be in the dark anymore," Sophia replied, her voice steady but tinged with fear. "I love you, Dominic. But I can't keep going like this, not knowing what's really happening." Dominic's chest tightened. He had always kept her away from the truth, thinking it was for her safety. But now, looking at her, he knew that wasn't enough anymore. She deserved to know what she was getting into. "I'm not just a businessman, Sophia," he said, his voice low and serious. "I'm a part of something much darker. There are people who won't stop until they take everything I've built. And they know that you're the one thing I care about. If they think they can use you against me, they'll do it." Sophia looked at him, her eyes wide with shock and understanding. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Dominic moved closer, taking her hand in his. "I'm saying that this world, this life I've led, isn't safe. And I can't keep you away from it any longer. I'm planning to deal with Grimaldi once and for all. But I need to know that you're ready for the truth. For everything. For a moment, Sophia didn't speak. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known, deep down, that Dominic's world wasn't one of clean hands or simple decisions. But hearing the reality of it, hearing it from him, made it feel all the more real. I've already lost so much, Dominic, she said, her voice trembling. But I don't want to lose you. I want to fight this with you. But I can't do it if I don't know what I'm fighting against. Dominic swallowed hard, his eyes searching hers. You don't have to be involved, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You can walk away from this and go back to the life you had before. I won't hold you to this world. I'll let you go if you want to walk away. Sophia looked at him, and for a long moment, she said nothing. She could feel the weight of his words, the way he was giving her the freedom to choose. But her heart was already set. She had already made the decision. I'm not walking away, she said firmly, looking him in the eyes. I love you, Dominic. And I won't leave you now. We'll face this together. The words filled Dominic with an unexpected sense of relief. He had been bracing himself for her to walk away, to leave him and his world behind. But she hadn't. She had chosen him, and that meant everything. Are you sure? He asked, his voice low. This isn't going to be easy. We don't know what's coming, but I won't let anything happen to you. Sophia nodded. I'm sure. I'm not afraid. I'm with you, Dominic. Whatever comes next. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, feeling the warmth of her embrace as a sense of peace washed over him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't alone. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid to fight for something more than just power. He was fighting for her, and he would do whatever it took to protect their future together. The following week was a blur of tension and calculated moves. Dominic had made the decision to face Grimaldi once and for all, but now, more than ever, he realized how deeply Sophia was embedded in his life. She had become his anchor in a world where trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. The more he thought about her, the more he realized that he couldn't let her go, even if his world was about to collapse around them. He had warned her. He had given her the choice to walk away. But Sophia had made it clear that she wasn't going anywhere. She had chosen him, and, for the first time in his life, he felt like he had something worth fighting for. But the danger was real. Grimaldi had been making moves in the shadows, and the time had come for a final confrontation. Dominic knew that he had to end this. He couldn't allow Grimaldi's crew to threaten everything he had built, and he certainly couldn't let them destroy the one thing that mattered most to him, Sophia. It was a crisp morning when the call came. Dominic was in his office, going over plans for the final assault on Grimaldi's compound. His mind was sharp, focused, but all he could think about was the promise he had made to Sophia, that he would keep her safe. As he sat at his desk, the phone rang. Boss. His man's voice came through the line, calm but urgent. We've located Grimaldi. He's hiding out in the warehouse district, but it's heavily guarded. We'll need backup. Dominic's pulse quickened. This was it. The final showdown. I'll be there, Dominic said, his voice steady, though the weight of the moment was not lost on him. Get the men ready. We're ending this now. Sophia had been waiting for him to come home, her concern etched on her face when she saw him step through the door. Dominic, she said, her voice trembling. I know what you're planning. You're going after Grimaldi. Dominic nodded, taking a deep breath before walking over to her. I have to, Sophia, he said softly. This has to end. She reached for his hand, holding it tightly as if trying to keep him from walking away. I know, but I don't want you to go alone. You can't do this without me, Dominic. I'm in this with you. Dominic looked at her, his heart swelling with both love and fear. He had promised her he would protect her, but now, it felt like they were in this together, and that realization was both comforting and terrifying. You don't understand, Dominic said, his voice low. This is dangerous. This isn't just a battle for control, Sophia. It's a battle for survival. I can't let you get hurt. She shook her head, her eyes fierce with determination. I'm not going to stand by while you risk everything. I'm not walking away from you, Dominic. Not now, not ever. The words hit him harder than he expected. For a moment, he was speechless, overwhelmed by the weight of what she was saying. But as he looked into her eyes, he realized that he couldn't deny it any longer. She was right. This was no longer just his fight. It was theirs. We'll do this together, he said, his voice firm. But you stay behind me. No matter what happens, you stay safe. Sophia nodded, her grip tightening on his hand. I will. Just promise me that we'll make it through this. I promise, Dominic whispered. The two of them made their way to the warehouse district, the tension thick in the air. Dominic's men were already in place, ready for the final assault. Grimaldi's crew was holed up inside, waiting for the inevitable clash. The warehouse was a fortress, guarded by armed men and surrounded by high walls, but Dominic wasn't afraid. He had faced worse, and this time, he wasn't alone. As they approached the warehouse, Dominic's mind raced with strategy. He could hear the sound of his men moving into position, the faint echo of footsteps as they silently surrounded the building. Everything was in place. It was time to act. Stay close, Dominic said to Sophia as they approached the entrance. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension that he couldn't hide. She nodded, her eyes scanning the perimeter, alert and ready for whatever came next. The first shot rang out, shattering the silence of the night. Dominic's men moved quickly, taking out the guards with precision, but Grimaldi's men were no pushovers. The fight was fierce, fast, and unforgiving. Dominic led the charge, his focus unshakable as he pushed forward, determined to end this once and for all. He could hear Sophia's voice in the back of his mind, urging him on, reminding him of the promise he had made. He couldn't let her down. They fought their way through the warehouse, clearing each room as they went. The intensity of the battle escalated with every step, but Dominic didn't falter. He could feel the presence of his enemies closing in, but he pushed forward, each move a calculated risk. Finally, they reached the heart of the warehouse, where Grimaldi and his men were waiting. The tension in the air was palpable as Dominic stepped into the room, his eyes locking onto Grimaldi. This ends tonight, Dominic said, his voice unwavering. Grimaldi sneered, but before he could respond, Dominic's men moved in, surrounding the room. The fight that ensued was brutal, but in the end, it was clear. Grimaldi's reign was over. As the dust settled, Dominic turned to Sophia, his heart pounding in his chest. She was standing there, her face pale but unbroken, her eyes locked onto his with a mixture of relief and fear. We did it, she whispered. Dominic nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. It's over. It's finally over. But as he looked at her, he realized that while the battle had been won, the real fight was just beginning. And this time, he wasn't going to face it alone. The aftermath of the battle was a strange, almost surreal calm. The warehouse lay in ruins, the final remnants of Grimaldi's crew scattered or captured, and Dominic stood in the center of it all, his mind still racing with the intensity of the past few hours. Sophia was by his side, her eyes tired but determined, her hand still clutched tightly in his. The danger was over, for now, but Dominic knew better than to think it was truly finished. The city was a constant game of power and influence, and even though Grimaldi was out of the picture, new threats would always arise. It was the nature of his world. But for the first time in a long while, Dominic felt a sense of clarity. He had fought, he had protected what was his, but more than that, he had fought for something real. He had fought for Sophia. He turned to her, his voice soft but steady. It's over. They won't bother us again. Sophia looked at him, her expression a mix of relief and wariness. But for how long? She asked, her voice quiet, almost fearful. Dominic sighed and reached for her hand. I can't promise you that the danger is gone. This world will always be here. But I can promise you this. I will never let anything happen to you. I've lost too much already. I won't lose you. Sophia nodded slowly, her eyes filled with understanding, but also uncertainty. I don't want to live in fear, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. I've seen what this world can do to people, what it's done to you. I don't want that for us. Dominic pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. I know, he whispered, and I won't let it take you from me. I promise. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. Sophia held on to him, the weight of the moment heavy between them. She had come into this world, this dangerous, unpredictable life, because of him, and now she was fully immersed in it. She couldn't deny how much she loved him, how much she wanted to build a life with him, but the reality of their situation was undeniable. Every day was a battle, every choice a risk. She didn't know if she was strong enough to live in this world, but she knew that she couldn't live without him. For the next few days, they both laid low. The chaos of the battle had subsided, but the tension was still thick in the air. Sophia spent her time in the penthouse, trying to find peace in the quiet moments, while Dominic went through the motions of running his empire, making sure that everything was in place for whatever came next. He couldn't afford to slow down, not now, not after everything they had fought for. Sophia knew that he was doing this for her, for their future, but it didn't make the weight of the situation any easier to bear. Every night, when Dominic came back to her, he looked more tired, more worn, as if the weight of his world was starting to crack him. It was during one of these quiet moments that Dominic spoke what had been on his mind for days. "Sophia," he said, his voice strained, "I've been thinking about what you said, the part about not wanting to live in fear. And I want that too. I want us to have a future, a real future. But I don't know how to get us there." Sophia turned to him, her heart aching as she saw the vulnerability in his eyes. She had never seen him like this, so unsure, so open. "I don't know either," she admitted, her voice soft. "But maybe we don't have to have all the answers. Maybe we just have to take it one step at a time." Dominic looked at her, his gaze intense but filled with a tenderness he rarely showed. "One step at a time," he repeated quietly, as if testing the idea. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I want to build a life with you, Sophia. Away from all of this. I want to find a way to make it work, no matter how hard it gets." Sophia smiled, her heart lifting at his words. It wasn't a promise that everything would be easy, but it was a promise that they would face whatever came their way together. And that was enough for her. "I want that too," she said softly, her hand reaching up to cup his cheek. "I don't care how difficult it gets, as long as we're in this together." Dominic leaned into her touch, closing his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the world lifting just a little. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about his empire, about control, about power. He was thinking about the woman in front of him and the future they could build, a future he never thought was possible. "Then that's what we'll do," he said, his voice steady with resolve. "We'll take it one step at a time, together." They stood there, holding each other in the quiet, their hearts aligned in a way they had never been before. There would still be challenges, still be dangers lurking in the shadows, but for the first time in Dominic's life, he wasn't afraid. Not because the threats were gone, but because he knew he wasn't facing them alone. He had her, and that, more than anything, gave him the strength to keep fighting, for their future, for the life they would build, and for the love they had found in the most unexpected of places. The days that followed their decision to face the future together were filled with uncertainty, but also hope. Dominic and Sophia, despite the chaos of his world, found moments of peace in each other. The war with Grimaldi's crew was over, but the scars it left were still fresh. The city outside continued its relentless pace, indifferent to the personal battles that had been fought. But Dominic no longer cared about the shadows lurking in every corner. The one thing that mattered to him now was Sophia. He had made a promise to her, and no matter what, he would keep it. As the sun set over the skyline, casting a warm golden hue over the city, Dominic sat next to Sophia in the quiet of his penthouse. The weight of his empire, once so overwhelming, now felt lighter with her by his side. He had never allowed anyone to get close to him the way Sophia had, and for the first time, he felt the possibility of something more, something beyond the world he had spent so many years building. Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice soft as she spoke. "You know, I never thought I would be here, in this life." Dominic glanced down at her, his heart swelling. "I never thought I'd let anyone in," he admitted, his voice low and sincere. "But you changed that." Sophia smiled up at him, her eyes full of affection. "I'm glad I did. And I'm glad you're still here. We've been through so much, and yet, here we are. Together," Dominic said, his words full of resolve. "I won't let go of this. Not now, not ever." Sophia's smile softened, and she reached up to cup his face. "I believe you," she whispered. The next few weeks were filled with small victories. The danger from Grimaldi's crew was behind them, but Dominic knew better than to rest on his laurels. His empire, while secure for now, was always in flux. There would be new threats, new challenges. But as long as Sophia was by his side, he was ready for whatever came next. They spent their days building a life outside of the shadows of his past. Dominic took Sophia to places he had never allowed himself to enjoy before, a quiet park in the city, a hidden cafe with warm, comforting food, a small bookstore filled with old classics. For the first time, he allowed himself to be vulnerable, to be just a man in love, not a mafia boss constantly plotting his next move. Sophia, for her part, found herself falling deeper in love with him. She had always seen the strength in Dominic, the man who had built an empire with his bare hands. But now she saw the depth of his humanity, the parts of him that he had buried for so long. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but they would face them together, just as they always had. One afternoon, as they sat together on the balcony of his penthouse, overlooking the sprawling city, Dominic turned to Sophia, his expression serious. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. Sophia looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft. Dominic took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about the future, about us, and I want you to know that I'm committed to building a life with you. No more hiding, no more running from the past." Sophia's eyes softened, her heart swelling with emotion. "I want that too," she said quietly. "But you have to promise me something, Dominic." "Anything," he replied, his voice steady, unwavering. "Promise me that no matter what happens, we don't lose ourselves. We don't let this world change us. We hold on to what's real." Dominic reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I promise. I won't let anything change what we have." The world outside their little bubble of peace continued to turn, but for Dominic and Sophia, the future was something they could now shape together. They knew there would be challenges, moments of doubt, and hard decisions to make, but they also knew that as long as they were together, they could face anything. Sophia rested her head on Dominic's shoulder, closing her eyes as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The warmth of the day was fading, but the warmth between them was stronger than ever. And as the night settled in around them, they knew that no matter what the future held, they had each other. Dominic wasn't just a mafia boss anymore. He was a man in love, a man with something to fight for. And for the first time, he was ready to face whatever came next by her side.